What an unfortunate time to take a drink. Hello, my name is Cameron Cowan. Welcome to the Cameron Journal Newshour. I am so regretful to have taken last week off. So much has happened in the meantime, including an election. We'll talk about everything. Um, a bit of housekeeping. If you wondered why there was not a newsletter last Saturday, it's because I was moving platforms. So I've been really unhappy with WordPress's newsletter product for a while, and the data's not good. It doesn't seem to keep track of what I sent out. It's just not there yet, somehow. And so I decided to pack up the newsletter and move it over to my Substack, cameronjournal.substack.com. So if you want the newsletter delivered to your inbox every Saturday, um, feel free to subscribe, cameronjournal.substack.com, or if you go to cameronjournal.com/newsletter and sign up there, that's okay too. I'll move you over. I'll rehab the page and make changes and all this type of thing. But if you subscribe, that's there. That's okay too. But yeah, so we didn't have a newsletter last Saturday. Didn't have uh, um, a week ago from Saturday. Didn't have a news hour last week. This Saturday, we did have a really great newsletter that was very long, kind of made up for not doing one for a week. And then we also had, we're also having the news hour right now. So we're catching up on everything and all that's happened. And I maybe should have done an election live stream for the I only do midterms and presidential. I don't do off-year elections. But in the newsletter, I talked a little bit about the off-year elections, and we'll get into that in a minute. Don't forget to follow me on social media. I post lots of threads, helpful info, breaking down the news narratives for you. This is the show where if you're frustrated by news narratives, if you're frustrated by no one ever seems to be telling the truth, or everyone seems to be lying, or none of it makes any sense, or all this type of thing, that's okay. That's what I'm here for. The confusion keeps me in business. So that's that's fantastic. Speaking of business, if you want to support my journalism and this show and all that I do, please head over to cameronjournal.com/subscribe and become a Cameron Journal Plus subscriber. That will get you exclusive content and events and Discord hangouts that I do on my private Discord for Cameron Journal Plus subscribers. You can also I also do take tips at coffee.com. So link in bio. If you're watching on YouTube or Twitch, head over to my links. It's all there. It's also at cameronjournal.com. And if you're a newsletter person and you're not ready to subscribe to a monthly thing, I get you. I get it. I gotcha. Coffee link is in the newsletter too. So the thank you to everyone who is clicking on the link and donating and all this type of thing. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate you. Let's dive into things, and we're going to start with shutdowns and elections. I don't really have a story to read about this necessarily, although I suppose I could find one quickly. But we kind of know the facts. We'll start with the election, we'll get up to the shutdown. So, Tuesday last, we had off-year elections. Now, in some places in the country, they put state offices in elections where they're not electing Congress people and not electing the president, so the people will pay attention to them more. Virginia is one such state. Now, historically speaking, whoever is elected governor of Virginia in the year after a presidential election, whichever party candidate wins, that usually indicates where the next presidential election will go to. And this pattern is held up for a very, very long time. Good news for Democrats. Abigail Spanberger became the first woman to be governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia, beating out Winsome Sears, who had been lieutenant governor under Youngkin. And that was a historic moment. I think that was her second run at that office. And so that was a significant win. And if the historical pattern remains true, is great news for Democrats in 2028. The other big one was election New Jersey. The main story with the Tuesday elections, Democrats won everywhere. State houses, special elections, Prop 50 in California, which would allow the state to do mid-decade redistricting without the redistricting commission to basically draw Republicans out of California because Republicans are drawing Democrats out of Texas. Did go through with 60% of the vote. Um, on the night of, President Trump tried to say there was something wrong with the vote in California, all this type of thing, that there was, if Carolyn Levitt literally got on and was kind of like, well, there's fraud in California. That's just a fact. It's California. There's been no evidence of that. It's the 2020 playbook. If you say there's a problem long enough, people will stop believing in elections, at least the ones that you don't win. So that is 110% a whole fun thing that they're trying to do. Although I noticed that narrative died quite quickly. So the election was on Tuesday. That narrative didn't last more than about 24 hours. Although I'm sure that there will be other things and whatnot as time goes on. Hang on one moment. I'm gonna. Okay, there we go. Um, but I'm sure there'll be more issues with Prop 15 California, especially as that goes through and that happens and all this type of thing. Anyway, the big narrative coming out of the election, that honestly it was kind of the first good news Democrats had for a long time. Especially coming out of the 2024 election, a lot of people were, well, I mean, disheartened. I mean, as I've said since the election, this is a retreat and surrender of the left in this country. We're going to be moving into a more conservative phase. I was talking to a friend of mine, and he said, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. He's like, the question, though, is it 1980 sort of thing? And I'm kind of like, well, yeah, there's an argument for that, sort of thing. Although people kind of forget Democrats controlled Congress through the 80s and Reagan had to work with them, sort of thing. But they're, as we're going into this conservative phase. And so obviously over the last year since the election, and in the, 10 months since the Trump administration got into office, the Democrats have been, if you're a Democrat or liberal leaning person in this country, it's felt like you've been under constant 24/7 nonstop attack, all the time sort of thing. It is, maybe at moments felt like there just wasn't, anything for you, any good news. Half of Project 2025 has been gone through. In fact, maybe we'll check the Project 2025 tracker here in a minute. All of these things have happened, and it just seems like we've been on the retreat, which we have been. Now there's this kind of sliver of hope in these different places. One state that elected a lot of Democrats was Mississippi, which just goes to show that a lot of these places that people have kind of written off as being Republican-y and all this type of thing, that's not a good thing to do, and the Democratic Party should invest in those states a lot more. But it was interesting how, and so obviously people, were talking about blue wave and all this type of thing. However, the celebration was a bit tempered because then today, Monday, a week out from the election, it was announced last night that a handful of Democrats, including Hassan and Shaheen from New Hampshire, Fetterman from Pennsylvania, decided to cross over and vote for the Republican continuing resolution to reopen the government. There was a cloture vote today, which is a vote that to agree we're going to vote. And then there'll be a vote in the Senate later this week, a vote in the House, and a resolution for President Trump probably by Thursday, Friday, that will reopen the government, pay federal workers, get the air traffic controllers back going, get SNAP benefits paying out, all this type of thing. Over the course of this shutdown, which I've actually written about very little, 2 times in the newsletter, that's it. Over the course of the shutdown, there has been a lot of vitriol about the SNAP program. Now let's look at this narratively. The narrative about welfare programs since the Reagan years has been welfare just supports lazy people who don't work. Well, that falls apart with SNAP. 51% of SNAP beneficiaries work, which the other half of that I've also argued is the problem. It becomes a subsidy for corporations who don't pay enough wages. A lot of fun has been made of people who receive SNAP benefits. There's been lots of comical videos of people being like, just get a job, sort of thing, not realizing half of SNAP people have jobs. The other are children and elderly, one of whom is too old to work. The other is oftentimes legally prohibited from having a job, and if they did have a job, probably wouldn't pay enough to feed themselves. So, this kind of all falls apart. Most people also don't know that according to the Congressional Budget Office, the EBT SNAP food stamp program is the most efficient program with the least amount of fraud of all the federal government. SNAP can pass an audit. Can't say that for the Pentagon. So narratively, what does this all mean? You had sort of two political narratives going. One was Chuck Schumer saying the president is using food to try to, blackmail the Democratic Party into accepting uh, reductions in Affordable Care Act, premium subsidies, raising healthcare for 25 million Americans, healthcare costs for 25 million Americans. And you had the other side saying, Democrats are forcing us with this laundry list of, things and demands to continue subsidizing people who don't need subsidy, and healthcare is bad anyway. And the ACA is broken, and it costs too much money, and this is how we're trying to kill it, sort of thing. And that's been the narrative. And caught in the crossfire is every federal worker, air traffic controllers, SNAP beneficiaries, all this sort of thing. And the reality of the situation is that today it worked. The ACA subsidies are going away. Healthcare premiums will skyrocket for 25 million Americans. A lot of people will be thrown off their insurance because they can't afford it. SNAP beneficiaries will get their food stamps. Thank God. The cost of the program is infinitesimally small compared to the social harm of having children starving in the street. It's an excellent thing to it's an excellent thing to pay for. And like I said, it is the most efficient government program with the least amount of fraud. Unfortunately, this is also woven through the hot issues of the day. So in the middle of this off year election where we have gerrymandering in California, because of gerrymandering in Texas, we have a government shutdown, SNAP benefits, which also is intersected with immigration. We have all of these issues sort of weaving together in this tangled web like snakes in a pit. We were just watching Indiana Jones the other weekend. All like snakes in a pit, just all roiling around. And two things come to mind. One, Americans pay a lot of taxes for comparatively little payoff. We actually are taxed as much as the Europeans when you count local to federal, and we do not have the social safety net. So most people look at it and say, I don't want to pay tax, just let me keep my money, sort of thing. And you have a lot of people being like, why should I work so people can, can eat who aren't working? It's like, well, do you really want a mother with 3 children trying to sell her children on the road because she can't feed them? Because that used to happen more often than you think. We already have a problem with children showing up to school hungry and all this sort of thing. And of course, everyone's been talking about every person they know that was a scammer or didn't deserve it or was selling their card or whatever have you, blah, blah, blah. All of this focus has been here for so long. And then the other thing is how all of this has become a proxy for all of these other issues. And so now we have this situation where, and I even saw this kind of as it was coming across the wires last night, that the government was going to reopen, is you have, people, some Democrats feeling betrayed because they wanted Schumer and company in the Senate to hold the line. They finally got some leverage. They were able to do something and they finally hold the line. And they haven't. They've basically folded and caved. And which some people said, oh, I guess that's our reward for electing them all over the country, sort of thing. And but then you also have this sort of um fractious um idea around taxation, what these programs mean, why do we need them, why do we have them. And I think this is a situation where people have forgotten how uncivilized things used to be. People have forgotten how bad things used to be. Um, Probably because they never lived in a world where these programs didn't exist. And this is the type of thing where when it does its job very well, you never know it's there. And that that makes talking about these programs in a competent way very difficult. It also makes it very hard in the context of this political moment where we're talking about immigration in a way that we never talked about before. We're talking about welfare programs which involves immigration in ways that we never have before. We're all treading over all this new ground, so anything that happens gets blended through this lens. And I think the thing that disappoints me the most is in all of these things that are said and whatnot is how, I don't want to say selfish, but maybe that's the only word, how selfish everyone is being. And I think part of that's out of survival. We're in very tough economic times, inflation is high, money is scarce for a lot of people. Um we have layoffs happening, the job market is not good, people can't find jobs, but somehow more immigrants are coming in on visas because there's no Americans to fill these jobs, sort of thing, and that kind of enters into it as well. And there's American ideas about independence and self sufficiency and what does it mean to live in a society, and what is society's responsibility to its citizens, what is the government's responsibility, what should we be doing for each other. And obviously if you're liberal you think that's a lot of things, if you're not it's a lot of other things. And that even gets into things like Zoran Momdani and his election as mayor of New York, and his idea of having city-owned grocery stores and city buying apartments, and having free buses and all this sort of thing. And him being a democratic socialist, and companies saying they're going to leave New York, and a million people saying they're going to leave New York, and all of these things. But then also in the midst of all of this, you have Marjorie Taylor Greene asking when her party's going to deliver for the American people. And 2 weeks ago when I did this show, I did a whole segment where I'm kind of like, why am I agreeing with Marjorie Taylor Greene? Yes. Yes. Yeah. So now, as I was telling someone, what we're really seeing now is we're getting populism from both sides, in terms of things aren't good. We want to be able to live and get ahead and make stuff happen. And we just aren't, we're just not there. And so now people are looking to their government to solve these issues. But the reality is that in order to solve them, you need a lot of money, which involves taxes, which is not going to make your donors very happy. And it involves really changing the calculus of society that we've had for the last 45 years with neoliberalism. Of no, we can't just have a country where everything is low tax and trade is free and open and all this sort of thing, and people are willing to come and go because the market will fix it all as people get paid more and they'll make their own decisions. And and it's kind of funny, in 45 years we've gone from get government off your back to people being like, we'd like some government on our backs please, sort of thing, because people just can't live anymore. And I have a tweet about recessions and economics, and we'll circle back to that subject. But I think narratively speaking, it's interesting that we have populism coming from both sides, but we have negative reactions to populism. We have this government shutdown thing over healthcare subsidies, and Democrats folding on it. And so what does all this mix up mean? It means we're in a very unique, and I would say very precious, political moment where big change becomes possible, where being able to have an effect and a meaningful change on society, on our relationship with government, our relationship with society, finally becomes possible because enough people are really demanding it. Now, obviously, we're still a ways away because the government just hiked the healthcare premiums of 25 million people, and Chuck Schumer and Democrats went along with it. And that's going to leave, Democrats feeling a bit burned. But I think it's very interesting that we're kind of seeing these narratives, even immigration. And America First really is about putting Americans at the fore and doing better for citizens and not just people in general. So now we're getting to this place where maybe we can have a competent discussion about what our society can be. And we might be able to have a competent discussion about what government can do and what government could do for us. And that is a very interesting political place. Unfortunately, like I said, we're not necessarily ready maybe for that conversation as much as we would like to be, given present circumstances. But I guarantee you this. All of these things, SNAP, healthcare, housing, affordability, this is all going to figure into 2026. Now, if you're the Democrats, this is great news. But, as we're going to see in a video from Chris Cuomo, the how to get there and how much to listen to the far left, where most of these ideas originate from, could be up for some debate. So with that in mind, let's go to that Chris Cuomo video, actually. And let's listen, we'll talk.
You're killing your party. You're killing your party. And look, I hope it works out for you. I hope you guys splinter off and become, whatever you really are. Because you're not a capitalist and you're not a Democrat. And, you can say, well, what do you know? I was raised by a real one. I was raised by a real one. Go ahead and criticize Mario Cuomo. What's going to be your biggest insult? That he spawned me and Andrew? Is that going to be the best you have? Because you ain't shit compared to him. Not in terms of intelligence, not in terms of success, not in terms of pedigree, not in terms of philosophy, not in terms of mission, not in terms of eloquence, not in terms of charisma, not in terms of anything. Certainly not electability. You are killing your party because you are not a real one. Because you're doing what's good for you in a vacuum with your little social media following. You're no different than a pod bro. And you're killing your party. And Democrats better wake the fuck up and realize that you're better than this. Be with the 80, not the 20. Okay?
And bearing in mind the context of this post is, you're not capitalists and you're sure as hell not Democrats. Let me drop the hammer. I was raised by a real Democrat, Mario Cuomo. You're not shit compared to him. Even Cuomo's had enough of the quote-unquote far-left takeover. And that, and then obviously there's a whole bunch of debate in the replies about, how liberal Chris Cuomo is or is not. And far left people being like, yeah, well, the left is still the problem. And bearing in mind, this all goes along with, the election of Momdani and what that means when America's largest city in the center of the world financially decides, yeah, we want some democratic socialism. We want a city that functions not just for the wealthy, so the city's a playground for the wealthy, but for working people. And And you end up, it kind of shows that, every election, same promises, different rats. Welcome to New York City. Liberal dreams, real world prices. And it shows all the past, mayors with Vision Zero and Close Rikers and End the Tale of Two Cities and the City of Yes and it turns out free wasn't free sort of thing, and all of a sudden you know it's not so easy as they would say. So I think the main kind of point of all of this, and this gets, again, all of this stuff, the government shutdown and immigration and all this type of thing, all comes together to people want a society that works. And let's face it, any party that can deliver a working, functional society for working people will be in power for generations. And you want to know how I know? Because FDR did that in the 30s with the New Deal, and Democrats held power off and on in the White House, but they held power in Congress for the next 70 years. Republicans couldn't. Republicans in the 50s were begging for thread. Even their guy in the White House was pretty liberal. He's kind of like, yeah, we should have a national highway system. It'll cost a fortune. Start plowing, sort of thing. I mean, it's a very different. It's a very different paradigm, and any party that can deliver that is going to do very, very well. I think the funny part is Trump, much like Obama before him, promised a lot of that functional society and hasn't gotten there. But it's very obvious with the election of like Zoran Momdani and other Democrats elsewhere that people are not going to wait around forever. People want to be able to afford a place to live, afford to save money, be able to afford a car, all this type of thing. And I mean, let's face it, tariffs are not helping. And it's not delivering many jobs, all because we still have layoffs and all this sort of thing. There's, and even if you go to our, farther right, you know, more racist friends, part of the reason they're targeting immigrants and immigration is so they can feel like they have a quote unquote functional society. Everybody knows, I don't care who you are politically, everybody knows that what we're doing right now, what we have been doing, isn't working. It doesn't work anymore. Can't afford anything. Everything's so expensive. Wages aren't growing. This isn't working. It's time for something else. Now, this is a great opportunity. It's also very dangerous. I'll tell you why. It's dangerous because history shows that in these moments, someone with the wrong agenda can come along and things can get very dangerous. It's also an opportunity to do something great for everyday people. And it's not just, oh, this minority, this disabled person, whatever have you, to do for every working person, for students, for everyone, everywhere, to actually have a country that feels like it has our back, rather than one that keeps kicking us in the jaw. That's what people are looking for. And whether who you're, attacking or not, just like in this video with Chris Cuomo attacking the radical left, the point is, there are people in our society for whom the present system is working very well. They tend to be the wealthy and corporate donors to major political parties because they've paid for the privilege to get their agenda through. For everybody else, which is literally almost everybody else, this is not working. And here's another thing history will tell you. If people can't find a way to get what they want, they'll take it. And that usually involves guns, blood, and a lot of dead bodies. So, we're going to change topics, but I'll leave you with this. I say let's avoid Civil War 2.0. Just a thought. And rather than devolving into gray market, black market, sort of sad, depressing economic circumstances that disadvantage everybody, let's make that great society. Let's start turning the dials. Does that mean the wealthy and corporations will pay more? You bet. You bet. But as I always joke, people talk about the 50s and 60s, but you know what enabled that? Two things. Three things. Government regulations, government price controls, and high taxes. Top end tax rates were 95% in the 1950s. That's what enabled that. Keeps money moving through the economy. It prizes economic activity, actual production over financialization. That was what changed in the 80s. Is we decided money from nothing was better than money from something. And as this economy has changed, it's slowly but surely left people behind. And now with AI, it's financialization on steroids. Now you can get money for nothing with as few inputs as possible, because AI is replacing labor, all this type of thing. So now all of a sudden you've got a system that can make money without too many humans being involved. A frightening prospect. If we don't do something about this now, we risk putting society into an extremely dangerous place. I recommend we do something now, but that's just me. What do I know? All right, what else have we got? Oh, let's talk about this story while we're on economics. Then we'll get to Jack Smith and Tulsi Gabbard's latest canard. It says we're looking at employment data. It says here, long-term unemployed. It sounds clinical, but it means 6 months without a paycheck, or 1 in 4 jobless Americans are there now. Every time we've hit this level, a recession followed. Does Washington still think the answer is more OPT and H-1B visa renewals and loopholes? Again, this is one of the reasons why immigrants are being targeted, is because of these numbers right here. And so it's looking at the overall employment rate and then share of long-term unemployed, 27 weeks or longer, 6 months. And we see here from August 2005 to 2006, leading into the Great Financial Crisis, overall unemployment goes down during this time, but share of long-term employed ticks steadily upward, except for this weird anomaly in January, which is probably a seasonal adjusted thing. Ticks steadily upward. And even, going into the financial crisis, we're still far beyond that. But look at overall unemployment rate. It's way down. Why? Because after 6 months, they stop counting these people, because that's when you roll off unemployment benefits. People don't know that, but the overall unemployment rate is actually a very poor indicator of how the job market is doing, because they don't count a bunch of people. If you look at the, I think it's the F6 number, or T6, it actually counts everybody, and we usually have around, it's actually right now about 12%. So this is the sad situation. And, it seems foolhardy to let in more economic migrants and more visas when we have long-term unemployed at 25.7%. And so we look at, and someone did this great graph. Employment level foreign born January 2007 equals 100. Employment native born January 2007 is the start of this graph. And so it shows, you have the big dip for the pandemic, of course. And then you have native born unemployment, rising back up out of the pandemic. But then you see this huge spike. And it was already quite much larger. There's this gap here. And now it's just absolutely huge, And I love this picture because it says, AI isn't taking your jobs. And, kind of without comment sort of thing. And this person points out, in case you're wondering, kids, we're at Great Depression levels of unemployment. True. And it's kind of funny because as we talk about having a functional society and having a place where you can get a job, buy a house, get ahead, all this type of thing, all of a sudden, everyone's looking around at me kind of like, hey, I can't get those things. I can't have those things. I work hard. I'm willing to show up, all this type of thing. And the reality, and I talk about this in my book, America's Lost Generation, is you're now competing with the whole globe for labor. Here's the problem. American labor is the most expensive in the world, which means it can literally be undercut by anyone. Literally. Just don't be an American and you'll automatically be cheaper, and you can get paid half of an American's wage and feel like you're doing very, very well. The $60,000 job can now be paid an immigrant for $30,000. The $100,000 job can be paid an immigrant at $50,000. Where does that extra money go? Into the pockets of shareholders. Simple as. And I've always said you will never, ever, ever solve immigration until you get corporate America off the teat of cheap labor. It's that simple. If you want to slow down immigration, you've got to get corporate America off cheap labor. It's that simple. Once you do that, then things can change. But as long as they require cheap labor, they will do whatever they have to do to get a hold of it, including offshoring, which is now the latest new thing. Send it to Mexico, send it to India, anything to keep labor costs down. And especially with AI, you now have two things pressuring labor costs. One is global competition, and the other one is AI. Because now they're looking at the headcount and looking at different job positions and say, can AI do it? If no, can we offshore it? If no, then it gets to stay. If yes, one of those two things will be an option. Where does this leave the everyday working American? Bereft. Unfortunately. And this is why the calls to stop this are louder and louder. And I feel sorry that immigrants are becoming targeted in all of this, but the reality is people look at all of these new people, all of these new neighbors, all of this immigration, and at this point they're saying, yeah, you're taking my job. And one would argue they're not entirely incorrect about that. Now, I want to kind of tick over onto Stephen Miller and the, Trump administration, all this sort of thing, because I found this post rather interesting. So this is one of those Twitter accounts that is always posting some emergency alarmist sort of thing because you interact with it, of course. And this clip from Stephen Miller is rather interesting. So we'll back it up and watch.
The Democrat Party has become dangerously, violently radicalized. And you're right, Sean. I get death threats every day. My wife gets death threats every day. We've obviously had to deal with pretty extensive doxing campaigns. But the truth is, Sean, that people across the country, across the government, across law enforcement, who are fighting for safety, security, prosperity, are dealing with radical left communist threats and attacks all day long. And President Trump, of course, came within centimeters of being assassinated.
1 millimeter.
During the middle of his rally on live television by a wicked, evil assassin, and then only weeks later, a second assassin. If not for a Secret Service agent spotting the barrel of that gun, would have taken President Trump's life, saved by the hand of God himself. We are dealing with a party that is so extreme that considers its opponents to be its mortal enemies, that dehumanizes its opposition, that justifies violent attacks against federal law enforcement, assaults against ICE and Border Patrol, that sides over and over again with criminal aliens, MS-13 gangbangers. Look at how they venerated and worshipped and praised the MS-13 child smuggler that they dubbed the Maryland Dad, somebody who beat his wife and smuggled children and was a member of a terrorist organization, and they held him up as their hero. This is a dangerous party. This is a dangerous movement. And what you're seeing in New York City with Momdani, that is the future. A party that believes in no bail, a party that believes in no jail, a party that believes in no borders. But here's one group they do want to put in jail. They're political enemies.
And it's funny because the comment section is a mix of things, but when we talk about putting political opponents in jail, I would submit to him the 2016 Trump campaign with lock her up. Like, there's a reason we got to this moment in the political country. And I'm not saying Stephen Miller's all right or all wrong, although I disagree with him on some of his facts. But we got here in a very specific set of circumstances. And we didn't arrive here necessarily by accident either. The reality is, when you have someone in political life who's willing to say anything that feels good, anything that draws a crowd, anything that draws a headline, anything that keeps the $1 billion of free media coverage that he got in 2016 going, thank you, mainstream media, you enter very dangerous territory because you erode belief in elections. you enter very dangerous territory because you give permission for things that were hitherto taboo and unspeakable. And I'm not saying that there are not far left types who, cheer on violent political violence against Republicans, because that's true. And we need no look further than the Charlie Kirk scandal to see how that happens. And as everyone knows, I condemn that behavior in the strongest sense. Despite the many disagreements I have with Charlie Kirk. He never deserved to be shot or killed for it. That's not what this country is about. And I did a whole hour of this show just on him. And but I would say, that old phrase, every accusation is a confession. There is a lot of that rhetoric who started with the right first. And unfortunately, what it does is it creates a society where that becomes permissible. And when that becomes permissible, a lot of people who hitherto would have felt uncomfortable to say that when it kept their mouths shut, believed that they might have that private thought and never speak it out loud because for fear of what people would say, all this type of thing, all of a sudden the court comes off. And this is true of racism. This is true of political violence. This is true of a great many things. And we've now gotten to this place where this type of thing is regularly aired on television. And when you start saying that your political opponents are a dangerous party and a dangerous movement, what you start to do is give permission for people to do really terrible things. Now, my Republican colleagues and my conservative friends would say, but Cameron, isn't that what the left has been up to? Yes, and that's the problem. And I can go back into the history that we can start talking about Greenpeace in the 70s and how they stopped underwater nuclear testing, okay? I can talk about globally how this has occurred. I have a degree in insurgency and counterinsurgency. That's a whole rabbit hole. Perhaps I should do an hour on that at some point. The only way to stop from getting to this place politically is by never, ever allowing that in public dialogue. Because it always leads to a very dangerous place. I will never countenance anyone who thinks all Republicans should be killed. I will never countenance anyone who says all Democrats should be killed. What I am very worried about is that we are now in a place where there's no respect on the behalf of Stephen Miller that people would dare to disagree, that they would protest against ICE, they would protest on behalf of immigrants, all this sort of thing, and that, if you're not with us, you're against us sort of thing. And we have an interesting history with that. No one ever talks about the conscientious objectors during World War II, because it was considered gauche at the time to not want to participate in the war, even though people have forgotten World War II was actually quite unpopular. And nobody really wanted to be involved in yet another European conflict. And the propaganda and the history of that war is entirely covered up. But the reality is we were in a place in this country where we locked up the Japanese until the Supreme Court said no. We put the fire hose of water to conscientious objectors. We have completely erased them from the history books because they didn't agree with the party line. And the idea that someone can't protest against something, that they might not agree with you, and that somehow makes them dangerous is absolutely crazy. And this goes both ways, by the way. The fact that many people on the Democratic Party and the far left think it's crazy to not agree with them is also dumb. This is the thing about Republican, small r, Republican democracy, is that you have to come to consensus. You have to have debate. You have to work with people that you disagree with. And I realize in this day and time, especially given what I just said about the shutdown and healthcare costs and all this type of thing, the stakes seem very high. And it seems like Schumer and company have rolled us on over and taken us for it. It also, it seems like, we've got to, stop Republicans, stop authoritarianism, stop fascism, this, that, and the other thing. Here's the problem. getting ever more extreme, not in policy, but in action, ironically, makes the problem worse, not better. Because you then turn in to the ghouls that keep Stephen Miller going. Now, the reality is Stephen Miller will find any reason to criticize Democrat. And he will find any reason to criticize any liberal person for anything, and his rhetoric kind of, shows that sort of thing. But one of my frustrations with the far left is that they do an excellent job of doing the GOP's job for them. They come up with the most terrible slogans that are great protest slogans, but terrible policy, defund the police. They also have a bad habit of creating the imagery and the ad assets that do the Republicans' job for them. And so on their march forward of progress and all this type of thing, they have no mind of how this might be read politically. How in this day and age, if the average person is randomly scrolling on their phone and they see a video of someone doing something crazy, that's going to be their whole impression of the movement. There's no sense of messaging. That was something people don't get about the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement was very, very careful to control the messaging, how it looked, how it appeared. They made it respectable. That's how they got change through. There's no discipline like that on the left. The Republican Party is always lockstep in line on messaging. Here on the Democratic Party, it is a complete mess. And this leads to making it very easy for Republicans to say Democrats are crazy. And that's what this clip is about. So, in all the stuff that we've talked about today, we've gotten to a place now where this type of rhetoric is entirely acceptable and cheered on. And that's a very dangerous place as a country. Speaking of danger in the country, we're not going to do Jack Smith right now. Let's check into Tulsi Gabbard for a minute. So, Tulsi Gabbard has been on the bandwagon that the Obama administration tried to overthrow the government, and that they did everything they could to keep Trump out, which is really not true at all. But that's what that's been her latest ballywick. So we're going to listen to her latest statement, and then we'll talk.
We look at where we are now. Over the last several weeks, we've declassified and released documents that exposed how President Obama and leaders in the intelligence community knowingly manufactured a false intelligence document after the 2016 election was done, after the American people said, no, we want Donald Trump to go and be our commander-in-chief, not Hillary Clinton. And this manufactured document alleged that Russia aspired to help President Trump win the election with the aim of undermining his presidency and usurping the will and the voices of the American people who sent Trump to the White House. We look at where we are now over the last several weeks.
It is quite obvious that, having gone through the documents and on this show and all this type of thing, it is quite obvious that her task is to do her level best to undo the Russia narrative, the Russia hoax, and to also reinforce that not just the 2020 election was stolen, but that the 2016 election was almost stolen. And here's what's kind of funny about all this is, if the Democrats are so good at rigging elections and depriving people of political office, they're horrifically inconsistent about it. So we tried to get rid of you in 2016, and that didn't work. So now we're going to get rid of you in 2020, we're going to rig the election, but then not rig it for 24? Or rig the 2022 midterms? I mean, are they just lazy? Or is it more likely that that's not really what's going on here? We went through the documents and showed how they asked for a new intelligence assessment because the reality is a lot of Trump people were connected, had some uncomfortable ties to Russia, often through Ukraine. Ask Roger Stone and Paul Manafort about all that. We now know, because of Cambridge Analytica, that the FSB was actively using social media to manipulate people for the Trump campaign in 2016. Now, there is no proof that the Trump campaign ever actually knew it was happening, or there was no coordination. But what we do know is that the main social media person from the 2016 Trump campaign, was working with Facebook and through Cambridge Analytica, and not only was Facebook supplying an outsized amount of manipulative help to the Trump campaign, but Facebook knew what Russia was up to and did nothing to stop it. That's part of the reason why there are so many regulations on how you can share news on Facebook now. Ask me how I know, because I'm an account that shares news on Facebook. Now, I've gone through all the verification, ID, journalist, I'm in the monetization program, like, I've been through the hoops. It's a lot. All of that's there because of 2016. There were congressional hearings about this. We now live in a world where foreign powers can have direct access to media channels that can change election outcomes. That's the world that we live in. In 2016, we did not understand that. Cambridge Analytica hadn't come out yet. And so when you look at, it's 2025, it's been 9 years. And here we are, still talking about this. I'm very pleased at some of the comments, some of the top comments, all this type of thing. And even AI is not on board with it and all this type of thing. It's, very, very helpful, that there's all that, sort of, pushback sort of thing. But the fact that she's kind of out here flogging this is very interesting. And they did that one document dump, but then didn't do any others. So, it's kind of like, okay, if you've got more receipts, maybe release those and maybe there'll be something. But the point is, there isn't really anything. They're trying to clean up a narrative. And that's why I always say it with me now, news is a narrative. That's why they call it a story. That's, all part and parcel of this. And that is, quite concerning. All right. Speaking of Russia, let's go over to the Jack Smith story. So I read this. This was in the Sunday Times. I think. It says here, Jack Smith, Trump's target, shifts from defense to counterattack. The former special counsel told people in his orbit he welcomes the opportunity to present the public case against the president denied to him by adverse court rulings in the 2024 election. It says here, President Trump's unwilling fast-track drive to humiliate, investigate, and prosecute the people he hates has gained momentum, in part because his targets have not been in a position to inflict serious retributive pain on him. Jack Smith is different. Mr. Smith, the special counsel who twice indicted Mr. Trump, appears unintimidated by the president's demand that Republican lawmakers investigate him and that the Justice Department put him in prison for as yet unproved and unspecified crimes. Quite the opposite. In fact, Mr. Smith, who spent more than 2 years aggressively collecting evidence to prove Mr. Trump mishandled classified documents and tried to overturn the results of the 2020 election, appears eager to publicly challenge a foundational pillar of MAGA canon, that the president was a sinned-upon innocent who did nothing to deserve scrutiny, much less 2 prosecutions. Mr. Smith has told people in his orbit that he welcomes the opportunity to present the public case against Mr. Trump, denied to him by the Supreme Court decision asserting a broad presidential immunity from prosecution and adverse rulings from a Trump-appointed judge in the federal bench in Florida. Whether Mr. Smith gets the chance to confront his accusers on the biggest official stage available to him, a public House or Senate hearing, remains very much an open question. Some Republicans have privately expressed concern that Mr. Trump's quest for vengeance could backfire by giving credible anti-corruption investigator an open mic. Deranged, Jack Smith is a criminal, Mr. Trump said on social media on Wednesday after House Republicans released documents showing that the special counsel's office examined communications between Mr. Trump and 160 Republicans as part of the inquiry into his efforts to overturn the 2020 election, which also includes the fake electors scandal. We continue. He proceeded to place Mr. Smith at the top of his prosecutorial hit list, along with the 2 top Biden appointees who picked Mr. Smith, a veteran war crimes prosecutor, for the job, Attorney General Merrick Garland, and his top deputy, Lisa O. Monaco. The president declared that they should all be, quote, investigated and put in prison, unquote, next to a photo of Mr. Smith. Until now, Mr. Trump, in the half-joking estimation of one longtime advisor, has been able to order up investigations of his political enemies like Ubers. But in the 2 low-key but self-assured appearances over the past 6 weeks, Mr. Smith has made it unmistakably clear that he will not only defend himself, but take a hammer to Mr. Trump's exaggerated or false claims about his work as special counsel. The idea that politics played a role in who worked on that case or who got chosen is ludicrous, Mr. Smith said during an early October interview with Andrew Weissman, another former prosecutor targeted by Mr. Trump at the University College London. Mr. Smith said he had, quote, tons of evidence, unquote, that Mr. Trump had willingly retained the classified documents at his residence in Mar-a-Lago and tried to, quote, obstruct the investigation, unquote. The president's Republican allies in Congress have begun taking the first steps to investigate Mr. Smith at the urging of the White House and far-right activists. Their efforts are animated by a belief that Mr. Smith, despite his claim to the contrary, went beyond the bounds of an impartial investigation to go after Republicans. In recent days, they've made public hundreds of previously unreleased documents showing Justice Department prosecutors before and after Mr. Smith's appointment subpoenaed records of Republican lawmakers and Trump-allied groups. But the lawmakers are divided on precisely how to proceed. According to interviews with lawmakers and their aides, some have expressed concerns about giving Mr. Smith a public platform, unless their records trawl uncovers something so damning it shatters his credibility. Nor do they see much political upside in rehashing an issue of a searing import to the president, but of little interest to voters in battleground districts at a time when approval of Mr. Trump's performance on the economy and immigration is sagging. Yet they're forging ahead at Mr. Trump's goading. On October 10th, the GOP-controlled House Judiciary Committee summoned Mr. Smith to testify behind closed doors about what Republicans on the panel called partisan and politically motivated prosecutions of Mr. Trump. Earlier this year, 3 former Justice Department prosecutors, J.P. Cooney, Jay Bratt, and Thomas Wyndham, appeared for closed-door interviews that revealed little new information according to Republicans on the panel. Mr. Smith, up next, has begun moving his own chess pieces. Through his lawyers, he demanded public hearings, along with asking the Justice Department to give him broad latitude to discuss evidence presented to grand juries. Neither request has thus far elicited a response. Name the time and place, Lanny Brewer, one of Mr. Smith's lawyers, said in a statement. Jack will be there. The House Committee, the Justice Department, and the FBI did not respond to requests for comment. Representative Jim Jordan, a House Republican who leads the committee, is likely to issue a subpoena in the coming weeks rather than accede to Mr. Smith's demands for public hearing, according to a person familiar with his thinking, speaking on the condition of anonymity to discuss internal deliberations. And then it goes on to some of the politics around it all. This is kind of one of those quiet stories that we won't probably hear a lot about in the mainstream, but I wanted to bring it up because the way it will break into the mainstream, if it does, is if there is a lot of something there and a public forum is given at any portion of the way, or stuff starts to come out. And the reality is when you start having these committee meetings and people start to get in the know, stuff's going to come out and one of two things is going to happen. Either it's going to explode out into the public and it's going to be a huge scandal, one of the many going on at any given moment these days, or, and I think this is more likely, kind of like Epstein, which we don't talk about anymore, it'll get buried. Because there's some there. We'll find out very shortly. So, alright, that's the top of the hour. This was a fun story and not important, so we don't gotta talk about it. I'm gonna break off. I just did a fantastic recording with one of the most important playwrights in China named Stan Lai. He was calling in from Taipei, Taiwan. We had an internet issue at one point, so I'm gonna have to cut it together, but we spent an hour and a half talking about theater and music and art and movies and Chinese culture, and it was amazing and magical in every way. But it also means I'm tired, my voice is gone, my voice is going. So we're going to stop it there. Thank you all so much for watching. My name is Cameron Cowan. This is the Cameron Journal Newshour. I'm here every Monday at 7. Don't forget to follow me on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter and Instagram, at Cameron Journal on TikTok, LinkedIn. And I will see you on Wednesday for The Living Joke with Will and Connor. We have a great show for you this week, and I will see you next Monday on the Cameron Journal Newshour. There's no interview today because I've not finished editing new podcast episodes. I just finished a couple this afternoon. So keep an eye out. There will be new interviews this week with all sorts of great people, all sorts of new authors. It's going to be exciting. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye now.